Okay, so what do we use nowadays to provide us with this £17? Well, it doesn't look like we're in a net exporting situation. We don't make anything of any note anymore. So can't be that, can it? Can't be net exporting. Well, it sort of is. What happened years ago, we used to have something called trade, and based this thing called, I know economists are kind of a bunch of silly sausages, don't know what basic banking is, but they used to have, they had theories of trade, which again I think are lots of problems in anyway, but basically one of the things they've done lots of thinking about this, a lot of it wrong. The general idea is that we make stuff in the UK and we sell it to other countries, and they make stuff and then they sell it to us. So it's basic kind of trade, and their theories are all based on this sort of model. You'll hear on the news quite a lot about these new deals, trade and investment they call it. It's the investment part that I think was where we get a lot of our stuff from, the extra cash from nowadays. Now the investment sounds like a good thing, and they market it as such. They talk about sort of technology coming into the UK from abroad and sort of yada 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 yada, and that being sort of investment type stuff. But actually what it really is they set up a situation whereby this is the UK and these are abroad. People abroad make stuff, and in the UK we buy it, but they don't want our stuff in return. They don't buy our goods anymore in any sort of quantity. But what do they buy? And what do they do with all that they give us? We give them money, basically. What do they do with the money? And what they do with the money is not buy our goods. What they do is they buy us. And we're in the process at the moment of being sold. So what they do is they use that money and even more money on top of that, hence the slightly net situation that keeps us all afloat, because there's a bit more dosh in the country than enough dosh in the country to be moving around with and getting some economy going. They buy government bonds. So what do they do with that is they get interest payments. So at the moment in the UK, and actually been like this for many, many years, the interest payments, last time I saw, were bigger than the defence budget. So it's like, given like China particularly has a policy of buying government bonds, certainly American ones, I don't know about the British. We could be in a situation whereby we pay more money in our taxes to the Chinese military than we do to the British military in these interest payments. And that every year that's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. What else do? They buy shares in our companies. They buy the companies. They buy land. I mean, Scotland now is most of the land in Scotland is now owned by foreigners. Chatting to an estate agent a while back, and she says every time a house goes on the market in the local area, a Chinese buyer comes in, not a person who's Chinese. An agent of the Chinese government comes in to buy the house. And so basically, over the years, the whole UK will become tenants in houses owned by the Chinese Communist Party. And so what's happening is the Industrial Revolution, there was a build-up of the UK in terms of capital. When I say capital, real capital, roads, railways, ports, ships, all that kind of real stuff, buildings, companies, expertise, and now we're sort of basically selling that off, and we're living off the sale of the United Kingdom. When we've run out of things to sell, that's it, game over. There's nothing left of us. We'll be a poor country. Whereas some things will go up and down in life, we'll have nothing left to go upwards. It'll be a flat line. It's quite a serious situation we've got ourselves in, and it's one of those that nobody is talking about. I mentioned the Chinese. I was in a company a while, telecoms company. There was a meeting happened, and a whole delegation of Chinese, what looked like mainly Chinese businessmen, came in order, because they were selling it was Huawei, and they were selling kind of mobile phone equipment, masts and stuff, to the UK company. And this was before all that stuff about, Huawei's, spy technology and stuff. By the time that all blew up, and they were saying, that's it, we're not allowing UK companies to buy Huawei, they'd already installed all the Huawei stuff around the country anyway. There was one guy in the Chinese businessman looked pleasant enough, and I didn't have any interaction with them at all. They all got shuffled off into a private room. I just saw them come in. There was one guy in there, and he had a face that was just absolutely stone cold. it just really was a weird look. So I said to one of the salesmen, there was only salesman in the UK side of the meeting, I said to one of them afterwards, I said, who is that fella? And he said, oh, he's a major in the Chinese Communist Party, in the Chinese Red Army. And he said every time a Chinese company of any size does a deal with a foreign company, they always have an agent of the Chinese Red Army there. So I said, well, did we have an MI5 guy on our side, to balance these things up, to make sure the national security interests were getting protected? He goes, oh no, they're just a bunch of salesmen on this side. So you got to be serious about this and adult about it. There's serious agendas, they're not just buying us, they're not just a normal trade partner. There's serious long-term political agendas, and the Chinese are famous for playing the long game. So this is serious, and the whole country is basically getting sold to the Arabs, the Chinese, perhaps even the Norwegians as well. They have sovereign funds from the oil revenue, and they do a lot of that sort of buying things around the world as well. Okay, so now let's get on to a suggested solution, and if it's not the right solution, I think it's where the solution needs to be. It's a starter for tenors to thinking about it. So the classic situation is that the formula of the economy is the Sisyphus equation. And Sisyphus was the kind of guy who rolled the ball up the hill, and then the ball rolled all the way back down again, and he continued that forever, which has been pretty much the story of the Western economy. We tried fixed assets, we rolled the ball up the hill, and then it all came back down again because we ran out of fixed assets we needed to build, and the depreciation charges ate all the profits. And we tried all the other stuff I've mentioned, the mortgage boom, the student debt boom, the government debt boom, and now we're in selling the family silver boom at the moment. And the thing is, we won't get eternal chances to keep on doing this. Once we've sold the family silver, we'll roll down, we'll roll back down, and we won't be able to get back up again. And the Sisyphus formula is the net profits of all the companies in the UK equal to the penny. It's a bookkeeping identity, as it were. Can't get past it, or we can if we redo things a bit. It equals increase in fixed assets of those companies, which we saw earlier on when the stock, the fixed assets will include stock increases as well. In the first example, the stock of 17 was the profit, and the second example, the fixed asset, the fence or whatever they were building, the warehouse that was valued at 17 would match the profit. It equals that plus the increase in government debt, plus the increase in private debt, plus the increase in foreigners' debt, which is you come from the net export situation. Now, my suggested solution is NEFS, NEFS, which goes here. And that is net export, because there's foreigner debt, which is net export. This is net export financial simulation. It's like net export, but we don't actually do any net exporting. We get the extra cash, but we don't have to bother with all the net exporting and then producing stuff we don't need ourselves, but we only need it to balance the books, essentially. It saves all that wasted time and wasted resources. We export and import what we need. We don't do it in terms of real physical need, but we don't export and import for a financial need to balance up this equation that we're stuck in because we're using an out-of-date financial system. So what on earth is this NEFS? It's a bookkeeping entry, basically. So what happens is, or what can happen is, you have probably best done by some sort of centralised bank. They call it a NEFS bank. I want to call it something different from the Bank of England. So let's call it Bob, shall we? The Bank of Britain, because it's going to do something totally different from the Bank of England. It's going to run the NEFS. So we have a classic situation of, here we go again, a banker issues a loan for £100, loan £100. There's a current account of £100, which he gives to the business. And then what happens that the manufacturer, he has the original £100 cash. We have a worker there. He has the original £100 cash, but let's do this at the end of the week. At the end of the week, he has £100 in stock, and he has the loan, £100, and then the worker has £100 cash, and he has £100 wealth. So what happens is, all these things are valued at cost price at the moment, and it's the difference between the costs and the sale price, the profit, that's causing this net profit thing. It's causing all these. It needs to be fun. When you look at governments around the world saying, we need to reduce government debt. Well, the problem is that will reduce the net profit available that you can actually make, unless somebody else picks up the slack and you start building more fixed assets or there's more private debt. You can't have a situation of just reducing the total of that and getting this to be anything other than it's going to be always identical. So what we do then is we have this this Bank of Britain. This is what that will do, is that will say, well, the sale price of the goods is going to be 120, so, and the economy is short of 20 quid. So instead of the government going into debt and then we borrowing that money from the Chinese and paying interest back for years and building fixed assets we don't need and railways we don't need in order to fund the 20 quid and wasting everybody's time, wasting resources, etc., etc. This economy should be doing stuff for the wealth of the people to do what we need, and when we've got what we need, we kind of stop and go home and enjoy it. You know, there's we do have a bit of a puritanical streak in the English and American world, whereby, you know, more work basically. I'm looking here, the whole point of this is more life. So it enables you to have, you know, shorter working weeks, shorter working lives, and lives with more time for yourself. But when you have time for yourself and you don't have any resources, you're unemployed. But when you have time for yourself and you've got some money, then you're on holiday and you can enjoy life more. That's the general thing, you know. Money doesn't buy happiness, etc. But as the old song goes, I'd rather be miserable with than without. So what Bob does, it issues something called a NEF, a bunch of NEFs, which are going to be 20 quid. And in the same way that the wealth of the individual here is shown in this part of the balance sheet, we'll call the wealth of the nation from the NEFs to balance up the thingamajig. What we then do is the banks will put those NEFs. So they will have on the balance sheet NEFs of 20 quid. Bob will then instruct the bank to place that 20 quid they'll have in cash in the current account of all the individuals in the country, best done equally. I mean, you can do these things we'll give it to the pensioners, we'll give it to, you know, It's just probably best done equally to everybody, I've thought. Okay, that'll cause some problems, and maybe different nations will have different profiles, but generally it's kind of like the risk to sound a bit hippie-ish. You know, the sun shines on everybody, the rain falls on everybody. Everybody's involved in having some wealth. You know, it's like you walk down a road. That road was built, hundreds of years ago, perhaps even by the Romans. There's a very arguable case to say everybody owns that heritage, and this is the way to. And in a world where you can't move from A to B without some dosh, you can't enjoy that heritage without some dosh. So I think that the NEFS is certainly, from an idealistic point of view, it's best just distributed to everybody in the country, and by that I mean citizens. And I'm very keen about controlling what is a citizen. You know, that shouldn't be anybody who just decides to pop into the country. It should be. Many countries have very strict criteria on who's a citizen. Otherwise, small countries get overwhelmed by, a few boats arrive, and that country is no longer a country anymore. It's a large immigration camp. So I think it's absolutely vital a nation state will decide who a citizen is, and that's going to be a very strict criteria. So otherwise, if you say 20 quid's available for free money for everybody, we'll have a massive immigration influx. But the trick is we do it, everybody else does it as well around the country, around the world, and so there won't be that sort of push, that sort of suction of economic migrants. So the people then have, and the workers, obviously workers here, the consumers as well, people also not working, everybody gets it. This is the kind of total workers, consumers. They have 120 quid in cash, and their wealth is then at 120, and then they're able to buy all the produce that the manufacturer does when he sells his £100 of stock for £120. At the end of the session, the manufacturer will be able to pay off his loan, 100 quid, and he'll have £20 profit, and that £20 profit will be represented by, £20 profit will be represented by cash. And so he'll be very happy, the people will be very happy, because they've got the cash in the bank to be able to, we're not having, if we have a recession because we run out of some vital thing, we run out of oil or coal, or there's bad weather and food, that's one thing, but to have a recession because we run out of numbers in bookkeeping entries, it seems a bit silly. So preventing poverty by bookkeeping entries. What's the build-up? Well, we've seen every time the fixed assets build up until they pop. We've seen debt build up till it pops. Basically what will be happening is there will be an increase in the NEFS account, which is the bookkeeping entry. So it's some dusty ledger somewhere will show a number getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't think that's going to be, if that is a problem, it's going to be less of a problem than all the other forms of build-ups we've ever had. I don't think it's going to be a problem at all, to be honest with you. So that's the basics of it. How do you get the bank? Let's say, for instance, we had 2 banks. How would you get a bank to want to take a NEFS onto its balance sheet? We'll just have a look at a bank in terms of competition at the moment, because it's quite interesting. You've got 2 banks, Bank 1 and Bank 2. And Bank 1 has done the thing where he issues the loan of £100. And then at the moment he starts off with a current account to the consumer, and he's all very happy. Thing is, the loan he's given out, he may be able to say, for instance, who could get a loan for 5% nowadays? I don't know. But a 5% loan, say for instance, he's going to earn, that bank's going to earn 5% to £100 every year. The current account, well, they don't pay anything on a current account, but classically in the old days, and maybe one day they will again. Let's say, for instance, that it's always a small amount. Current account, maybe they have to stick it in the savings account for a short while. They'll be paying the consumer 1%, and the profit of the bank will be the 4% interest on the difference between what they pay and what they give. Now, if this person who has this current account uses that money, which people tend to do after they take a loan out, they don't tend to sit there. Well, you can do, but they don't tend to sit there. They end up spending that money, or they might have 2 bank accounts. So let's say, for instance, either directly or by giving it to somebody else who has an account at Bank 2, they do a transfer, write a check, whatever, and the money in this guy's bank account ends up in Bank 2. So the current account is now, that's down to 0, that's gone, it's no longer there. The current account is over here in this one. So this guy's now missing an entry, what's his asset? And this got Bank 1, and this guy's missing an entry here, what's his liability to get this bank to balance again? And what the difference is both here and here, minus 100, is what's called an interbank balance. So this guy has an asset which is an interbank balance with this guy, because this guy owes it, and this guy has a liability interbank balance. And the banks charge each other a bit of interest for holding balances against each other. So this guy here, he'll say, well, I don't know, interbank balance, I'll charge the bank 3%. So this guy gets charged 3% on his interbank balance. So he's only going to get 5 minus 3%. He's now down to 2% on his thingamajig. This guy paying the current account 1%. So 3% minus 1% is 2%. So this guy's now lost his, when a customer puts their money in a different bank, the bank you've taken out of is now suffers an interbank balance charge, interest charge. So when you look at a bank balance sheet, when you look at the balance sheet of a bank, they'll have all sorts of assets. They'll have government bonds on there, they'll have company bonds on there, they'll have all sorts of debt instruments basically, and they'll have a bunch of things that they owe. Pretty much every line on that thing is like the government bonds will earn, 3%, but they'll be be a low risk, as it were. They can pretty much guarantee that they'll be getting their 3% every year, because if somebody doesn't want to pay their tax to the government, so the government can pay the interest on the loans that it's taken out previously, the government will arrest that person, and if they decide to not resist arrest, the government will bring the guns out. So basically, this 3% is guaranteed by the police power at gunpoint of the government. So it's quite stable, charming, hey? Whereas when they have company bonds, if the company goes bust, well, they might be getting like 8% from a company bond and go, hey, we're getting lots of dosh. But it's like, it's a bit risky. It's like one day that might go down to 0. And that's how a bank does its business and spreads its risk and more or less survives. Why would it want to hold on its account NEFS? Because it's basically, as it looks, this isn't government debt it's going to earn 3% on. It's basically be sensible to give them an admin fee, as it were. But we're not looking at percentages here in terms of anything of any sort of income level. Well, the thing is, as we've seen so far on all the stuff we've been doing so far, what the banks do is the banks basically make money. When they do this double entry bookkeeping of a loan here, when they issue a loan, the double entry bookkeeping that creates that loan creates money. That they don't take money from savers and lend it out to people who want to borrow. I explained earlier on that there's an element where they can do that. Building societies will do that when they issue bonds. But as a general rule, you go to a bank and they will issue a loan. They're issuing you money. Although the academic world hasn't yet caught up with this, and the government and the banks know this themselves. And so, having done that, this is a seriously nice way to make money, creating money. And so, since time immemorial, government has put loads and loads of rules and restrictions on banks. And every time they put a rule and restriction on the bank goes, yep, I'll take it, yep, I'll take it, yep, I'll take it, because they have to. Because it's such a thing, banking is a huge sector, and that they earn billions. And yet, basically, all they do is the bookkeepers doing bookkeeping entries. And so, they're not making anything. And essentially, they're little more than an admin department, and they should really ultimately be earning little more than admin fees. But they're earning billions, and if their multi-billions goes down to multi-billions minus a little bit for the sake of another regulation, they just go, yep, okay, whatever, we'll take it, because their real profits should be down here. And they're swaggering around with multi-billions coming in. So for them, it's like, whatever you tell us, we'll have to do. And we will. So if the government says, stick some NEFS on your bank account, or you'll lose your banking license, they'll do it. Now, there are other tricks. You can do persuasive things on this, and you can say, well, each bank, depending on its size, and you don't have to do it on a daily basis, because it creates all sorts of volatility and stuff. Based on the size of the bank over a period of time, maybe a few months or a few weeks or a year or even 2 years or so, on average, the bank should be holding NEFS on their balance sheet of a level of 20 billion pounds worth of NEFS or whatever, and next year it's going to be 25 billion, and it kind of builds up like that. And they can put that rule out there. That's what you should be doing. And then if you're not doing that, if you decide not to hold it, and another bank decides to hold 30 billion instead of 20 billion that they have been requested, then what you can do is you can say, well, anything in deficit of what you've been appointed, you pay interest on, and anything in excess of what you've been appointed to hold on your balance sheet, you'll receive interest, and you'll receive interest from the banks who decided not to do it. And that one of the things that will then happen is you'll get banks that'll say, well, let's go for the NEFS market, and I'll take more than. We just sit there and do nothing with it, and we'll just get the extra interest that the other guys do. So it's a very, there's ways round of ordering and persuading the banks to hold NEFS on their balance sheet, and then we can all do things like enjoy our lives a bit more, and then we can have lots of robots, lots of AI do work for us, and you've got to be thinking. Because I do this in like the stuff I do. I go into companies, and they live here, and they've had occasionally think I don't know, this is the time they take to do stuff, and then they sometimes they get that they can reduce the time to do a task like this and reduce the time to do a task like this. They get me in. One of the things I do is I'm a programmer. Program spreadsheets, VBAs, and that kind of stuff. And I'll spend a few weeks or usually a few months in the place writing programs for them, and I'll automate it so that the time it takes to do is this. And the whole company's been built around, the whole departments are built around this sort of level of activity in terms of like working. And my whole life has been going in and utterly changing the orders of magnitude of what people do and how they need to do it and how much time they need to do it with. So I'm not interested, I don't look at, we make it a bit better. I'm looking at stuff that completely changes stuff. And this NEFS kind of fits into this. So I'm looking at dramatic and radical change in the time it takes to do stuff and the amount of effort we need to do. I mean, I was up in, I think it was Wembley Arena, which is next to the Wembley football stadium. And there's like a room literally the size of, I think it's the size of Wembley Stadium, and it was full. It was an exhibition day, and it was merchandising for business. So it was pens, and it's like your company name on this pen. It was post-it notes with your company name on the back of this post-it note. It was t-shirts, desktops, computer screens it was all that kind of stuff. And the entire Wembley Arena was filled up with thousands of people whose life was making this corporate tat, basically, all to just, it was kind of like I said, what an utter waste. And it was a waste of time, all the sandwich shops feeding these people with their sandwiches, a waste of time with the travel and going to work, as a waste of time for the... So all the people who think they had a proper job, well, you know, I don't waste my time on that, I'm an accountant. Well, you're doing accounts for these people who are just basically producing essentially what virtually waste. And you got people who, you know, fixing the cars for these people. I'm a proper mechanic. Well, you know, I do this, I do it. The support for these thousands, it was a mini universe of waste, basically. And because they're all chasing that sort of like that little bit of extra dosh, just to kind of get, you know, because they have to work to get the money. And so, you know, lots of jobs are created. Utter nonsense. And I think with using NEFS, we can have a brand new world reasonably quickly. It'll cause problems. People have to work and find a new way to live. What a nice problem to have for the 21st century, a new way to live where you're not working like a Victorian from dawn till dusk. I mean, you go back to the Middle Ages, there were something like 56 bank holidays a year, because basically all you had to do was plant some seeds in the spring, and then you had to harvest them in August. And there was like sort of bugger all to do. We actually used to have an annual... For 100 years, we had an annual war with France in the summer, because there was nothing else to do, really. People built cathedrals. I know the Marxists like to talk about how people were exploited to build these sort of vanities, and, you know, they were talking about them almost being slaves. But, you know, a lot of the people and the artisans there, they just did it for free, because they were bored of something to do. And that's why they were able to produce such wonderful works of art and beauty that we still look at today. So I'm looking to get back. What I'd like to in my head is I'd like the production ability, which we've got production down to a T in terms of producing lots and lots of stuff, very highly automated. We're about to go into a new level of that with the AI, so it's going to be even more. I'm quite happy to keep all that and have more of it, or certainly more of what we want of it, rather than the tack as well, tat that comes out. More of that. So all the mod cons of civilization and more that we can have. Then I want the sort of like medieval holidays level of existence, or even more, whereby we don't need to work all day, all life, because we're using a faulty, out-of-date bookkeeping system. That's what NEFS is about. That's the idea. You might have another idea, you might have a tweak on this, but we need to start talking about this, and we need to do more than just talk about it and have a committee and an inquiry. We need to get on and trialling it, because you never quite know what's going to happen when things happen in reality. So, and it might be a very good idea. When you're on the top of a ladder and you decide to come off, if you step off the ladder and go down very quickly, you're going to break your neck. But if you kind of like go down the ladder step by step by step by step, you get to the bottom in quite quick time without the injury. So, you know, it might be like we do that rather than that. That might be a bit too brutal. I'm not against a little bit of an extension. But that's the general idea. And that's NEFS. Have a nice day.